This morning I'm going to deal with something. I'm going to look at some history, and actually I'm going to talk a lot this morning about Adventism, Seventh-day Adventism, and I'm going to justify by reading a quotation here that I found on the internet. It says, "Understanding history provides a roadmap for the future. It decodes how current societies evolved, and it develops sharp, critical thinking. It also builds empathy. By analyzing past triumphs and failures, we make better decisions. We avoid repeated mistakes, and we understand our own identity in a changing world." Now, I think I'm going to bring up the quote and actually let us look at it together, because I think there are some points there that I really want to reemphasize, because we need to understand what we are doing and why we are doing it. We're not just doing this because this morning I would like to entertain you, but it says, as it says here, it gives us a roadmap for the future. If we don't understand what happened in the past, will be confused about how we go forward. It helps us to make better decisions, absolutely, because we avoid the mistakes of the past. We get to understand why things happened, when they did, and how they did. And I like this statement where it says that it develops sharp, critical thinking. History was never my favorite subject in school. And I suppose one of the reasons is that I didn't understand its purpose, but also because history relates a lot to politics and how the world is run. And I never was very interested in that kind of thing. But after I became a Christian, of course, there was a certain kind of history that I became intensely interested in. And now, as a Christian here today, living in 2026, I want to know where I am coming from. I want to know, why am I where I am? I want to know, how did I end up here? Because this is helping me to think critically about how I'm going forward, why I'm going forward, what I'm doing. And so this is my reason for looking at this today. Most of you know that I was recently in California at a camp meeting, and some of these questions that were being discussed made me understand that it reminded me of some of the issues that are in the background of where we are today. This morning we are here in this fellowship, and most of us actually come from a background relating to Adventism. But there are some who, they know nothing about Adventism, they know nothing about our background, they don't understand some of the things we talk about. And I believe that understanding where the majority of us are can help some of these brothers and sisters who, they hear us talking about things and they don't understand. I'm going to demonstrate this morning, I want to demonstrate that these issues are important. It's important to understand where we are today, and I think I can speak for most of us in the room. Where we are today is different in some ways than where many others are, maybe where most other people are. Why are we different? Why do we hold to things that are somewhat different, even within what is called the One God movement? Even within what is called the One God movement, we are in a fellowship, a wider fellowship, where there are many Christians, again, mostly from an Adventist background, who believe that God is not a Trinity. And so we expect that we will find warmth and fellowship and companionship among these people. But not so. Our fellowship is regarded as believing things that are not acceptable. Why is this so? What is it that we hold to that is so unacceptable to even those who are a part of the One God movement. Now, this is what I want to try to help us to understand today. I know that there are some of us here who have a lot of understanding of these things. I know that Sister Diane, for example, most of the names and the places I mentioned from the distant past, she's familiar. Maybe she has come through the trenches like I have, but I have been through, and maybe there are some others of us too, but I have been through almost everything relating to the history of this movement. And I understand very well what the issues are. And because of this, I am better able to know how to relate to these other groups and to issues that come up. And this is what I would like to share with us, the rest of us as a family. Some of this information so we also can have a better understanding of why we are where we are. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. And we will use the PowerPoint as the basis for our presentation this morning. All right, so where did they go wrong? That's the title of my presentation this morning. Where did they go wrong? Now, I started out in life, in my Christian life, like many of us, as a very strong member or a very committed member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. These people who are depicted here on the screen were my heroes. James White, Ellen White, William Miller, Joseph Bates. I guess this is Rachel Oakes, Hiram Edson, Uriah Smith, E.J. Waggoner, Loughborough, Byington. These were the names I heard. And these were the early Adventists who were my heroes. And I read what these people said, and I took it as the gospel truth, and I committed myself, body, soul, and spirit, to the things that they taught, and I pushed for the promotion of these ideas. Some of us have been there. For many of us, this is like something brand new. We never really heard these names or understood this. Now, I believed, and I still believe that within the Adventist movement, the Advent movement, let me label it that way, there are critical truths relating to the end of time. And for those of us for whom this is like brand new, what do I mean by this? I mean by this that when we come to the end of time, I think most of us believe we are in the last days. And so what I'm saying is important for our time. When we come to this time, there are some vital truths that God wants us to understand and to experience. Some very important truths. And these truths are locked up in the books of Daniel and the Revelation. I believe that above anybody else on the earth, the Advent movement was given the foundation of these beliefs. Now, as I have said many times, as a Christian, I don't want to be trying to defend my position in an unfair way. I really want to be honest to the Bible. Every one of us, that's what we should be. So when I say what I just said, I'm not speaking lightly. I'm saying it because I truly, honestly believe that the Seventh-day Adventist movement, or the Advent movement, let me leave out the Seventh Day because that came afterwards. The Advent movement as it began was really something that God started, because there are two things that were taught in that early movement, which are truths for the end time. And I'll show you that these truths are unique to the Advent movement. The first of these is what I refer to as well, I'm not the only one who does it, but I prefer to use the label, the pre-Advent judgment. It's the belief that there is a judgment that takes place in heaven before Jesus comes back the second time. Now, let me tell you right away that the Seventh-day Adventist Church teaches this doctrine. But they teach this doctrine in a different way than how I understand it and than how we have been presenting it on this platform. I believe when you say the pre-Advent judgment, it is expressing the truth. But how you understand it is very important. This morning while I was praying, I was talking to the Lord about this, because my brothers and sisters, I want to be honest with the Lord. If I can't be honest with the Lord, then who will I be honest with? And I was saying to him, honestly, in the honesty of my conscience, Father, do I really find this truth in the Bible? The truth of a pre-Advent judgment. Is it really in the Bible? Look here. You cannot read Daniel 7 and Revelation 4 and 5 with an open mind and an honest heart and say there's no pre-Advent judgment. You have to completely dump those prophecies. You can't read them with an open mind and an honest heart and say there's no pre-Advent judgment. How you understand that judgment is critical. But you cannot say it is not taught in the Bible. In the honesty of my conscience, in my ability to comprehend, I believe in this doctrine. The other one that goes with it is that I believe that there's an end time day of atonement. End time day of atonement. And again, I believe that this is something that is so clearly taught in the Bible that you have to be totally, I beg your pardon, you have to be totally ignorant or somewhat dishonest to deny it. And I always say that I'm always willing and always ready to discuss this with anybody, anywhere, from any group, any denomination, because it is biblical. Now, what is amazing and what is vital is that these truths are only revealed through the Advent movement. All right? Now, this is what I found when I went to Wikipedia. I asked, and I know I did something like this recently, but I'm going to go a little deeper today. But I went to Wikipedia and I asked, I went to Google and I asked, and Google took me to Wikipedia. And I asked, what religious groups are there in the world which teach that there is a pre-Advent judgment and an end-time day of atonement? And of course, it says the doctrines of the pre-Advent judgment, often called the investigative judgment, I know that's what Adventists call it, and an end-time day of atonement are distinctive theological teachings primarily held by the Seventh-day Adventist Church and its related offshoots. I suppose that we might be categorized as being one of the related offshoots. And it mentions such as the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. And if you know anything about this group, you know it is a group that is called the Shepherd Rod. Why are they mentioned? Especially because, they're a large group and they go back way back to 1929. So the point I'm making, though, is that the doctrine of the pre-Advent judgment and the end-time day of atonement, according to Wikipedia, is exclusive to those who come from the Seventh-day Adventist environment. Now, I know that we have among us a mixed group. And I myself have said sometimes that I'm not identifying as a Seventh-day Adventist. And there are some who go further than me. If you mention Seventh-day Adventist, they will leave the room. As a matter of fact, I think it already happened. Somebody already left the room since I started talking about Adventists. And that is fine, because, you know, we have freedom. But the point is, we are related to Adventism, whether we like it or not. And we are related because we hold to some variation of these doctrines. And because we do, then it means that we are in the environment of Adventism. What happens there is important to us. It's significant to us. And it is helpful if we can understand. It says that these teachings are tied directly to the Millerite movement of the 19th century and the sanctuary doctrines outlined in the writings of Ellen White. While the concept of an end-time eschatological judgment exists across almost all of Christianity, what this means is that almost every Christian group believes that there is a judgment at the end of time. Of course, everybody believes that at the end of the 1,000 years, there's going to be a judgment. Some people believe that it will be when Jesus returns the second time, this judgment will take place. But no other religious groups teach this specific two-phase heavenly sanctuary and the investigative process. And that comes from Wikipedia, as I said. So the point is, what I'm saying is that if we believe in an end time day of atonement, and if we believe that there's a pre-Advent judgment, then we put ourselves in that category where we are in the I beg your pardon. We are in the category of the Seventh-day Adventist Church or its related offshoots. Now, why is it? Why is it that almost every other religious group, every other Christian group, not almost, every other one, objects to these two doctrines, the pre-Advent judgment and the end-time day of atonement? Every other religious group outside of the Adventist environment objects to it. Why? It says again, looking at Wikipedia, other Christian denominations have strong theological objections to the pre-Advent investigative judgment and the end-time day of atonement, and it mentions the groups. Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox Christians. And I think all of us will remember from our recent studies of the seven churches that these are the three great groups in Christianity. Protestants, nearly 1 billion believers; Catholics, 1.3 billion; and Orthodox, 300,000 believers. These make up Christendom. And all of these groups, it says, reject these teachings of Adventism. So the Adventist Church is lonely. It's a lone out there. They reject these teachings. It's alone in the Christian environment, and you can kind of understand why some Christian groups lean to the idea that Adventists are an outside group. They even want to label it as a cult in some cases. Also, it explains why many people who become disenchanted with Adventism, they reject the pre-Advent judgment, they reject the end-time day of atonement. And even some people who are friends with us, they are friends with this fellowship, but they reject those two ideas. Now, I have tried to promote those teachings here. All of you know. If you're a part of this fellowship, you know I've tried to promote the end time day of atonement and the pre-Advent judgment. In our Bible studies, we have been really presenting this. And I'm hoping that all of us are understanding, because I believe, and I hope I've been able to help all of you to see that these are very important teachings. They are the center of Daniel and the Revelation. And Daniel and Revelation are God's message for the end time people. The church at the end, our books are Daniel and Revelation. And these two things are the central teaching of Daniel and Revelation. So, for me to stop accepting, to stop believing in these teachings, I have to reject those two books. So, every other Christian group rejects these two teachings. And here are the arguments that they use. Number one, they say that the doctrine of these two doctrines undermine the cross. Mainstream Christians believe that Jesus completed the work of saving humanity when he died on the cross. The key word here is completed. They say he completed the work of saving humanity when he died on the cross. They point to his last words, "It is finished." And verses in the book of Hebrews stating that Christ made one final sacrifice for all time. One final sacrifice. Other denominations argue that teaching a second phase of atonement in 1844 implies that Christ's death on the cross was not fully enough to save people. So these other religious groups believe that the Adventist teaching of the end time atonement and the pre-Advent judgment, it is undermining what Jesus did on the cross, because they think on the cross humanity was completely saved and Jesus' one sacrifice was for all time. So they believe that the doctrine as Adventists teach it, it is saying that Christ's work was not completed. Is there a misunderstanding? The arguments go back and forth, but that is the objection they have. Secondly, they say that it destroys the assurance of salvation. In traditional Protestant theology, a person is saved by grace through faith alone. Believers have immediate peace, knowing their sins are forgiven and forgotten. They say that the idea that God is judging people, digging through the records, creates constant fear. And some of you have probably experienced that. The way that this doctrine of the investigative judgment is taught, it has led a lot of people to be fearful, because they think that they are not saved until their names have been called and their records are okay. And if your records are called, your name is examined before you have had time to say, "I'm sorry," you're lost. And I agree that for many people, this is a doctrine that creates constant fear. Thirdly, they say it looks like a face-saving solution. They say when William Miller predicted that Jesus would come in 1844 and he didn't come, Adventists just went and found an excuse to cover the mistake that they had made. That's the third reason why they reject this idea. And then the fourth reason, they say it misinterprets biblical prophecy. They say that the Bible does not support the way that Adventists go about proving their doctrine. First of all, they say that a day for a year, they say it is not in the Bible. It is not taught in the Bible. And they say to use a day for a year is to misuse the text. Well, I completely disagree with that. I think that's nonsense. I think it is clear that the day for a year principle is in the Bible, is in the prophecies in several places. And the other objection they have is that they say the scapegoat does not represent Satan. According to the Day of Atonement understanding, the scapegoat represents Satan while the other goat represents Christ. But most Christians say the two goats represent Christ. One represents Christ dying for sin, and the other one represents Christ carrying away sin. So when some Adventists say that the goat that carries away sin represents Satan, they say this is making Satan do the work of Christ. And, this is something we have looked at in our Revelation studies. I can't deal with it here now. But these are the objections, because I'm not going to deal with this in detail today, but just to make us know what are the problems people have with this doctrine. Now, what is the great foundation error? What is the great mistake? I believe that Adventists make a mistake, and the critics of Adventism make a mistake. We are, myself and those who believe as I do, I believe we are standing somewhere in a balance between those two sides. I'll talk about that a little later on, but what is the real problem? Why is it that nobody on the outside can accept it, and yet those on the inside have a problem that keeps on, they insist on this teaching, but it keeps on being offensive to people? Why? What is a fundamental problem? Because I think there is a problem. And this is what I believe is the problem. Again, I'm quoting from Wikipedia, which is I'm quoting from the Google search. Very, very useful. It kind of summarizes things. Seventh-day Adventists hold a very high view of the law of God, specifically the Ten Commandments. They believe that God's moral law is eternal, unchangeable. I believe it's eternal. I believe it's unchangeable. But they say it is still binding on all people today. This is what I believe is a foundational problem. If you look at the next statement, the fundamental belief number 19, it states that the Ten Commandments represent eternal principles of God's law. Okay, that's okay. Expressing his love while remaining binding for all time. Again, I want to highlight this word because I believe that this is where the problem lies. Furthermore, the doctrine emphasizes that while salvation is by grace, obedience is the resulting evidence of faith and love, which helps develop Christian character. You look at it and you can hardly find a fault with this if you believe that the law is holy and just and good. But I believe that this word binding is the problem. Now, I hope all of you can understand what I'm trying to say. Why do we walk in harmony with the commandments and yet we don't believe the commandments are binding? When we say something is binding, we mean that you are required to do it. You are required to do it. It's a subtle difference, but I don't think we are required to do the commandments. I think we are impelled. We are led. We walk in harmony with the commandments because we have been changed, not because we are compelled to, not because we are required to do it, but because it is a part of our nature. There's a difference. It might seem like it's just a little point of nitpicking, but it's very, very important. And I can give you an example. I can make a statement to help you to understand what I'm really saying. Let me just step back here for a moment to make this point. It comes to the question: are we governed by the law? Are Christians governed by the law? If the law is binding on us, then we are governed by the law. Then we are obligated to the law if it is binding. You see what I'm saying? If I can go back to that old illustration that I've used it a lot in the past. But when I was a boy, one of the reasons for my behavior was my parents' instructions. They gave me rules that I didn't like. For example, my mother, to this day, everybody in my family hates porridge, right? All my siblings, brothers, sisters, when I go someplace and they give me oatmeal and it's kind of thick and a little lumpy, I don't want it. And people wonder, how don't I like oatmeal? My mother cured us, right? She gave us porridge every day, and sometimes there were lumps, and My brothers and I would sit down at the table and we would sit there for a long time, not wanting to drink. And my mother was a no-nonsense mother. She didn't have time to waste when she had always had 6 to 8 children in the house. There were 10 of us eventually, but there was a string of us. And so she wasn't like these modern mothers. You drink or you get a spanking. So we had to drink it, and sometimes, man, we would sit there with that porridge and refuse to drink. And sometimes she would walk through with the strap. So we hated porridge. One of the things. But the reason we drank porridge was Mama. You better drink it or else. So we drank porridge because of Mama. I was under the law. I was under her law. So I had to do it. I was obligated. It's not a question of whether it was good for us or not. It's a question of the only reason you did this thing that was good was because you were compelled. It was binding on us. The moment I outgrew my childhood, Mama couldn't make me drink porridge anymore. And for years I wouldn't drink porridge. It was no longer binding on me because I was beyond the rule. I was bigger than the rule. But as an adult, sometimes now I eat porridge, but still I make sure that when Jen prepares it, or when I prepare it, not even one lump must be in it. I've even strained it at times in the past to make sure there were no lumps. And if I go somewhere and somebody offers me porridge, and I politely decline, and they wonder, what a strange guy. Now you know the history. But today, I will eat porridge. Jen gives me every now and then, make sure that there's no lump in it. But the reason is not because it is binding. It's because my attitude to it has changed. Yes, the porridge itself has changed a bit too, but my attitude to it has changed. And so I'm doing it voluntarily. It's not because it's binding. And it makes a big difference because when something is binding on you, it's a condition for your acceptance. When you didn't do it, you got a spanking. Today, there's no spanking, there's nothing. It's voluntary completely. Now, when somebody says that the law is binding on you, it means that you are still under that system of government. You are still under Mama's rule. Are we still under the rule of the law? This is what Adventism teaches. We are still bound by the law. The reason we keep the law is because we are obligated, and they teach this as a doctrine, and this is the way they present the law to the world. The law is to be kept by Christians because you are obligated. The rule is over your head, and you operate because of the rule. I totally disagree with this. You cannot read 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and still hold to that conclusion. We don't worship according to the letter, but the spirit, it says. We are no longer bound by the letter. It's the spirit in us that produces the result. So, I wanted to pause my PowerPoint to make that point clear. So when Adventists say the law is still binding, I completely disagree, and I believe that this is the foundation of the problem. Now, everything that is wrong in the Seventh-day Adventist environment is based on this misconception. I'm going to tell you that the Adventist world does not know what it means to be no longer under the Lord. I only ever found in all my years, 51 years within this environment, I only found one person who was an Adventist who presented a proper understanding of what it means to be under the law. One person. And I've looked at all of them, the great Adventist preachers, C.D. Brooks, Doug Batchelor, Stephen Bohr, all of them, going way back to the days of Waggoner, E.J. Waggoner. The understanding of what it means to be under the law is completely wrong. And somebody might say, how are you so barefaced to think that you can know right and all of those people were wrong? And I would say simply, we could do a study of the Word of God. You could simply go to the Bible and look at what under the law means in the Bible. And you would know where the truth is. But this misconception, this misunderstanding is the whole root of the problem. Why, although God gave the Advent movement the truth about the pre-Advent judgment and the day of atonement at the end of time, it has been distorted, completely out of shape. And the reason is because of this misrepresentation, misunderstanding of the proper relationship of the Christian to the law. Maybe I can say a bit more about that today, although it is something that will take a lot of time to really explain properly. Even in the book, The Great Controversy, here are these two statements. From the very beginning of the great controversy in heaven, it has been Satan's purpose to overthrow the law of God. Even in the book, The Great Controversy, the law of God is made at the center. The law is everything. The last great conflict between truth and error is only the final struggle of the long-standing controversy concerning the law of God. Revelation, the last crisis, everything is about the law. You can't get away from the fact that the doctrine of this church today is law-oriented. Law-oriented. And there's a label I give to being law-oriented. I call it legalistic. But it's law-oriented. Everything surrounds the law. That is the root of the problem. God addresses the problem. I think God really did. God understood. I mean, early in the history of the Adventist Church, God tried to deal with this problem. The 1888 Minneapolis General Conference session is regarded as the most critical and widely debated theological turning point in the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, this is what Adventists say. It shifted the denomination's focus from a rigid law-centered legalism to a Christ-centered theology of grace and faith. This is what they say. This is not true. This is not true. This is what they say happened. It didn't happen. Do you know that even E.J. Waggoner, the person who is held up as a great teacher of the 1888 message, Waggoner never got away from the law. I don't know if you have read the writings of Waggoner, the Gospel in Galatians, the Glad Tidings, Christ and His Righteousness. Waggoner was a member of the Adventist Church and he could not step away from the law. He tries to find a way to present righteousness by faith, still keeping the law locked into the picture. He can't get away from it because he's an Adventist, and if he moves away from it, he's going to lose his job. He's going to lose his place as a preacher in the church. Waggoner couldn't get away from it. Waggoner could not present the law the way we understand it today. Everybody in Adventism, they say they are teaching righteousness by faith. Righteousness by faith for them means God is helping you to keep the law. It's still about the law. The Lord gave me some thoughts on the law that I might have shared today. I was thinking of sharing a message about the law. But, I realized something. I'm just going to give a brief synopsis because it's a beautiful thought that I got, and it is this. I was asking the question, what is the purpose of existence? What is the purpose? And the law came into the picture as well. What is the purpose of existence? Why did God create you, and why did He create me? What for? When you put the law at the center, it's almost like God created you so you could keep the law. God created you so you could keep the law. Your purpose in your existence is to keep the law. So the law is the goal, and you are the object that is there to glorify the law. You almost feel like this is how they want to present it. But why is the law so important? Why? I asked the question, and I realized that, you know what law is? Law is a structure to promote harmonious fellowship. The purpose of law is fellowship, right? Think about it. Why should I not steal from Sister Arthur? Why should I not tell lies? Why should I avoid killing or committing adultery or coveting? Why should I honor my father and my mother? The whole purpose of it is Relationship. God outlined the law as a way of promoting harmonious relationships. That's the only purpose of the law. The bottom line is relationship. And the first part of the law that says, have no other gods before me. Don't take my name in vain. Don't make idols. Keep the Sabbath holy. The whole point is relationship with God. Outside of relationships, the law has no purpose and no meaning. Now, the law in the Ten Commandments, what is it? It is a formula for a civil relationship. It's a formula to tell me how to avoid having trouble with my neighbors, right? Don't steal from them, don't kill, don't tell lies, then I won't have any trouble with them. We will have a cordial relationship. Is that the best kind of relationship? And for God, you don't work on the Sabbath, you go to church, you avoid bowing to idols, and so you have a cordial relationship with God, maybe from a distance, but you have a cordial is the word I would use. But is that the ideal relationship? The best relationship? There you see Nina and Mia. Those are the kinds of relationships that mean something. Those are the kind of relationships that mean something. A relationship where there's a bond of oneness and joy and comfort to a degree where you can lie in a person's bosom and be absolutely at peace without reservation or hesitation. That is the relationship that God wanted. The Ten Commandments cannot take you to that place. They take you to the place where you live at peace with another person, but it doesn't draw you into that bond. So God says the whole point behind the law was love. God says the whole point behind the law was love, because love is selfless affection for others. That is the thing that promotes true relationship. And the thing that really blessed my mind was to realize, David, that's what God created you for. That's why the law is so important, the law of love. God created you. God created me to love Arthur in this way, to love Nina in this way, to love Kip in this way, to love Maxine, Maureen, and all those I can see in this way, to love them, not just to avoid stealing from them. That is legalism. Not just to avoid telling them lies, not just to avoid committing adultery. Avoiding the behavior of avoiding is for strangers. The behavior that makes you feel for a person, that when they cry, you cry. And when they are suffering, you want to go lie down beside them. And you want to wrap up yourselves and get involved in their lives. That is the true law. That's why God says everything is about love. Because the point is, I created you for relationships. This is why legalism in this age of the Christian church is so troublesome, because it puts you in a place where you are formal in your affection for others, but it doesn't go beyond the outside. And that is not what God created us for, and that is not what Jesus died for. That's why the Bible says over and over again, all the law is fulfilled in this: love one another. It's not about avoiding doing this, it's about being positive in loving people, in wrapping yourselves up and getting involved in their lives. In the world today, you don't want to get too involved in people's lives, but in the Christian family, you get involved, because when they hurt, you hurt. When they are in trouble, you are in trouble. When they are deprived, you are deprived. Because that's the true way the law of God works. So this legalistic definition that leaves the law at the center, the whole point is to keep the law. It is not fulfilling. It's not leading to true righteousness by faith. Adventism never got down to the real foundation of what righteousness means, because they still remain centered. Even in the days of Wagner, they were still centered on the law. It says two young ministers, E.J. Wagner and A.T. Jones, introduced a powerful message emphasizing that salvation is a gift. It's more than about salvation is a gift. It's about how do you live the Christian life. They argued that believers are justified through faith in Jesus Christ alone, not by keeping commandments. It's more than justification. It's about how do you live? How do you live the Christian life? Is it by referring to 10 rules, or is it by receiving Christ into your heart? That's the bottom line. How do you live the Christian life? Reading 10 rules, responding to 10 rules, or having a relationship with Christ where he lives instead of you? Which is the way to righteousness? This is where righteousness by faith never came to the bottom line. Before 1888, Adventist preaching focused heavily on the Sabbath, the law, upcoming prophecies. The conference forced the church to realign its unique doctrines with the foundational gospel message of grace. No, all it did was make the church adopt the teachings of the other churches. It never went deep enough into what righteousness by faith really means. Now, these are the two men who were involved, E.J. Waggoner and A.T. Jones. And they are the ones who brought the message. And what I'm trying to say is that this was God trying to bring the Advent movement to a place where the doctrine of the pre-Advent judgment and the doctrine of the Day of Atonement could begin to make sense. This understanding the message of righteousness by faith, understanding the place of the law, would have made those doctrines so acceptable that the objections would have had to go, because the doctrine of the pre-Advent judgment is not a legalistic doctrine. But anyway, we'll talk about, there's more, and so I'll comment on that further. Now, this is where I'm going to go into an area that I think most of us may not understand. I'm going to talk about evangelical conferences. I'm pretty sure people like Sister Diane will know about this. But in the 1950s, 1955 to 1956, there was a series of meetings that took place between leaders of the Adventist Church and two evangelical theologians. They were initiated by evangelical apologists, Walter Martin and Donald Gray Barnhouse. Donald Gray Barnhouse published a newsletter, a magazine called Eternity, and Walter Martin was a young theologian who was later to become quite famous. He was writing a book called The Kingdom of the Cults, and he wanted to put Adventists in the book. And so he decided to talk to the Adventists and see what they believed before he decided whether they were a cult or not. And so he and Donald Barnhouse organized a meeting with the Adventist leaders. It says, these watershed discussions led to significant theological clarifications and the publication of the highly controversial 1957 book, The Adventists Answer Questions and Doctrines. All right. So it says that these meetings took place over an 18-month period from 1955 to 1956. And I'll just read this highlighted section here. These meetings set out to clarify and correct substantial misunderstandings regarding traditional Adventist doctrines. So they published these two books, Adventists Answer Questions and Doctrine, and then Walter Martin wrote a book called The Truth About Seventh-day Adventists in 1960. Now, these are the people who were involved. Top left, Donald Barnhouse, he was the publisher of this magazine, Eternity. Middle top, Walter Martin. Top right was the president of the General Conference, a man by the name of T.E. Unruh. At the bottom, somebody that all of us, I'm sure, know pretty well, Leroy Froome. In the middle was another man, W.E. Reed. And over on the right, at the bottom, is Roy Allen Anderson. He wrote the book Unfolding the Revelation. So these are the men who got together to discuss these questions that these two men brought to the Adventist Church. So they came with these questions to these leaders of Adventism. And first of all, they questioned them on the question of salvation by grace versus works. The first question they asked was about the Trinity. What do you folks believe about the Trinity? Because they said if Adventists did not believe in the Trinity, there would be no more discussion. And of course, the leaders said, yes, we believe in the Trinity. And so the discussions continued. They assured them that Adventists did believe in the Trinity. They also discussed the nature of Christ. What nature did Christ take? Did he take the sinful fallen nature that Adam possessed after he sinned? Or did he take the sinless nature of Adam before he fell? And of course, the Adventists clarified that Jesus took on the sinless nature. That's what they said. It boiled down to, he took on the sinless nature of Christ before he fell. And the atonement, and they said, the Adventist leaders told them that the atonement was completed at the cross. At least that's how many people understood it. The sacrifice was completed at the cross. And that 1844 was only talking about how that sacrifice was applied. Anyway, these are some things that we will have to go through in detail at another time. I'm just kind of rushing through today to give us an overview of what really happened. Now, they also questioned the authority of Ellen White, and Adventists told them that, the leaders told them that Ellen White is just a lesser light and that she is not an authority, that the Bible is the only authority that is used in the Adventist church. And you can understand why there's a big confusion today, because some Adventists use Ellen White as absolute authority while others don't. There's not really a consensus of opinion on this. Now, this is a book that was written by the Adventist leaders after this conference. And if you have been around for a while, you will know that this is one of the books that is despised and harshly criticized by people in the historic Adventist movement, the offshoots. They count this as one of the books of a new order, one of the apostate books. Of course, it teaches the Trinity, but it also teaches a few other things that I will touch on a little bit. Now, when this happened, there was a man by the name of M.L. Andreasen. M.L. Andreasen. When I just started out in this movement, this man was one of my heroes. When I was a young Christian, I found a book on the bookshelf at home. It was called Letters to the Churches, and it was written by this man, Andreasen. What he did was he wrote these letters and he put them together in a book. There were letters condemning those conferences and condemning the decisions taken by the church elders. Andreasen gave me a lot of my opinions in the early days, because I read Andreasen, I listened to his arguments, and they made sense to me, and I became committed to what Andreasen was teaching. M.L. Andreasen is still a hero in the historic Adventist movement. Most of the one God believers, M.L. Andreasen is one of the heroes. Well, he never brought up the issue of the Trinity. He probably believed in the three in one God. But when it comes to what is sin? What is sin? What was the nature of Christ? The position that Andreasen took is the position that is embraced by the people in the OTG movement, the One God movement, and in the historic Adventist movement today. And I'm going to explain what that position is a little further down. Sorry. This was M.L. Andreasen. He was one of the most prominent and influential Seventh-day Adventist theologians, authors, and educators during the 1930s and 1940s. He was born in Denmark. He served the church as a pastor, college president, and a leading professor at the SDA Theological Seminary. He was widely considered the denomination's foremost authority on the sanctuary doctrine. He played a massive role in the subsequent developments following those conferences. He became the chief opponent to the theological shifts that the church made during those meetings. He became a strong opponent of the church elders. And you will hear, if you get into some of these discussion groups, you'll hear them talk a lot about Andreasen. Now he taught that the human nature of Christ, Jesus came to earth in a fallen human nature. Do you believe this? Well, I believed it when I started out. Possessing the same spiritual liabilities, weaknesses, and tendencies as humanity after the fall of Adam. But because Jesus overcame sin perfectly in this state, he proved that humans can do it too. You have heard this argument. This comes from Andreasen. Well, it didn't come from Andreasen. It was there with earlier Adventists, but he simply took it and he solidified it and he exposed it and brought it out in opposition to what the church taught in that book, Questions and Doctrine. But if you're familiar with what is going on with these historic Adventists, you'll know that this is one of their arguments. Jesus took the fallen human nature. He was just like us, but he overcame, so we can overcome too. Jesus is our example. We imitate him, and we can overcome sin just like him. This is what I believed. I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe Jesus came to be an example. I don't believe he was exactly like us at all. Jesus, the problem is, as you all know, they say he came in a fallen human nature. That is not the whole argument. Jesus, like all of us, had two natures. He had a spiritual nature and a physical nature. Spiritually, his nature was not like any of us. Spiritually, his nature was not like Adam before Adam fell. Spiritually, Jesus' nature was a spotless Son of God who came from heaven. In his spirit, he was the Son of God. But in his physical nature, he was just like us. He was made of a woman. He was made under the law with all our weaknesses and liabilities in the physical nature. But when they say he took our fallen nature, how can you ignore the fact that spiritually he was completely different? Jesus lived like no other human being. Out of the billions who have lived on this planet, one man lived without sin. And you are telling me he was exactly the same like me? And those who say he was, do you know why they say he was able to overcome sin? They say his mother taught him properly. Oh my goodness. When somebody told me that, I said, oh my God, I wish I had a mother like Jesus. Because it's that simple. So who gets the credit? Mary gets the credit. And it is so unreasonable and illogical, and yet this is what those brethren promote. That he had a mother who was careful in the way she taught him, fed him properly, and that is why he grew up. Even as a baby, he never sinned. Absolutely based on works. You eliminate the factor of God's divine nature. The key to overcoming sin is divine nature, not human effort. But when you say Jesus was exactly like me and I can be like him, therefore, then you make it on the basis of human ability and human effort. Do you see where works come in and why legalism is so deeply embedded in this kind of movement and this kind of thinking? This is why they insist so rabidly. Sin is the transgression of the law. To overcome sin, you keep the law. Jesus kept the law, so you can keep the law. You can keep the law because he was just like you. And just the way he did it, you can do it because it's all about, I don't know, you believe you can do it? That's where faith comes in, righteousness by faith. You believe you can do it. You believe God will help you to do it, and so you can do it. The divine element is completely eliminated. The truth is, brothers and sisters, nobody can overcome sin except divinity. Nobody can. When you start thinking of overcoming sin, you think of divinity. You think of God. You think of Christ. Don't think of human ability. But that is what this kind of thinking leads to. It leads to the place where you focus on human ability and you think that because Jesus was completely, absolutely, without qualification, just like me, therefore I can completely, absolutely, without qualification, be just like him by my hard labor. And it is nonsense. Andreasen taught this. He also taught that in the final days of Earth's history, a last generation of believers will achieve total, flawless sinlessness. I believe this too. but the method by which it is achieved is what makes a difference. They say they will achieve this total flawlessness by perfectly keeping God's law. This group will vindicate God's character and prove Satan's accusations wrong, allowing Christ to return. All of this sounds good. The problem with it is that Andreasen and those who take that direction, they are teaching that we overcome sin completely because of our efforts in keeping the law. We believe it will be the Spirit of God doing a miracle in God's people. This is what will bring that 144,000 to the place where they are without fault before the throne of God. Humanity cannot achieve the place of faultlessness by human effort, by law keeping. That's not possible. The end result seems to be the same, but the process of getting there is different. When church leaders published the book Questions on Doctrine to satisfy evangelical theologians like Walter Martin, Andreasen was deeply alarmed. The book stated that Jesus was born without any inherent sinful leanings and that the atonement was completed on the cross. You see, the church went in the other direction. They say he was without any sinful leanings, and that is not true because in his body he had those leanings. The church went completely to the left, and the historical people, Andreasen, went completely in the other direction. Andreasen viewed these changes as a betrayal of historic Adventism. He argued that this book introduced a sinister change, a dangerous heresy to appease evangelicals. When I was a young Christian, I got into this discussion, I got into this movement, and I was outraged at the apostasy of the church leaders, but I never understood that those in the historic movement were also in apostasy. I didn't understand. I have a lot. Let me hurry through. I'm going to rush through, and sometime in the future I'll do a more detailed study of this. But the Brinsmead Awakening movement, the Awakening movement led by Robert Brinsmead, he was an Australian, was a form of sinless perfectionism focused on the cleansing of the soul temple. Why I bring up Brinsmead here is because he was the first major independent movement. He took up Andreasen's teachings and he refined them a little bit, and he started this great movement. It was a huge movement in Adventism called the Awakening Message. When I was a young Christian, it was kind of fading out, but it was a big movement, and it was the first. All the independent movements that we see today kind of had their Brinsmead movement as the example. The reason why that movement died away was because Brinsmead gave it up. He gave up Adventism, gave up the Sabbath. He got involved with an Anglican minister who persuaded him to accept the evangelical understanding of righteousness, justification by faith, and he abandoned Adventism, and he became he gave up the whole movement, and the movement eventually died out, to the great disappointment of many people who were really totally committed to this Brinsmead movement. I'm going to skip over some of this. Now, who has the truth? This is the cover of a book that I bought some years ago. And it's asked the question, who's got the truth? The person at the top is Maurice Venden, then there's George Knight, then there's Jack Sikera, then there's Ralph Larson. And these are people who are discussed in this book because they have widely differing points of view. Now, in the Andreasen camp, those who supported M.L. Andreasen are people like the historic Adventists, people like Andrew Henriquez, maybe people like Walter Veit. Those kind of on the fringe, they support the idea that Jesus came with the sinful, fallen nature of Adam, and that the only definition of sin is that it is the transgression of the law, and that we are to overcome sin by keeping the law perfectly, the whole how many yards. These are the group of people. They call themselves historic Adventists, and many of us, I know that I was in that camp for a while. I escaped in 2005 when I came to understand better. And then this is the great majority of independent SDAs. They are in that camp. And it's the great majority of the one true God believers. This is why our fellowship is not accepted by these other fellowships. Pioneer Health and Missions, SDA Press, Smyrna Gospel Ministries, Restitution Ministries, the whole 9 yards, all of them. The reason why they will have nothing to do with people who are like us is because our understanding of what sin is completely different. Our understanding of the nature of Christ is different. So even though we believe the same or similarly on the one God, our understanding of the way of salvation, of what is sin, is completely different. They are not going to agree with us. And absolutely, I don't agree with them on those issues at all. Now, this is another person who was in that camp. His name is Robert Wayland. He and another minister by the name of Donald Short, they wrote this book, 1888 Re-Examined, where they were trying to bring back the church to the teachings of Wagner in 1888. They believed that that was the answer. There have been many efforts to bring the church to that place where it actually understands and accepts righteousness by faith. But like I say, everything has the law at the center. They cannot get away from the law. And I understand why. They cannot get away from the law, because the law is a foundation of Seventh-day Adventism. You can't get away from the law. So even though he put together all these statements from 1888 and tried to bring the church back to 1888, it was just going back over the same ground again and again. He is the one who, you know, he's very well known, but my goodness, he's the one who said that Mary's, Jesus' mother, is the reason why he lived without sin. And he said that, you know, a person can be born again. A person can be born again because you can have faith before you are born. And you want to know how he proves it? He says in his book, I think his book is entitled The Broken Chain. What he says is that John the Baptist had faith before he was born. He said John the Baptist had faith before he was born. And the way he proves it is, he said, when Elizabeth met Mary, John the Baptist leaped in Elizabeth's bosom, in Elizabeth's belly. And he says it shows that John the Baptist had faith. And this is the kind of thinking, you know, that supposedly sensible people are involved in, because they are trying to stand by unreasonable doctrines. Any of you could imagine that before you were born you had faith, but this is how people defend this kind of thinking. So Whelan is well known and famous, but really honestly his theology and his understanding was limited. Another person who is outstanding in that camp is a man by the name of Ralph Larson. And he wrote a book called The Word Was Made Flesh, and the whole point of his book was to teach that Jesus was exactly like we are. Those on that side all hold to that idea. And their concept of victory over sin is imitate Jesus. He did it, so you can do it. It's based on imitation, while the true gospel is based on substitution. It's Christ in my place, not me imitating Christ. The doctrine, the gospel of imitation, is a foundation of these people. And of course, one of the most well-known promoters of this idea is a man named Dennis Priebe. He is in the same camp as Ralph Larson, as Robert Whelan. And he is one of the heroes of those who say that sin is exclusively the transgression of the law. Now, on the other side, you have another group of people, and most of these are in the church, but they are outstanding because their teachings are well known. And these are the people I was taught to be afraid of. When I was a part of the historic movement, these people were presented as the enemies. One of them is George Knight. George Knight is a church theologian. There are things he teaches that, you know, I find distasteful. But in terms of his understanding of what is sin, George Knight, I believe, agrees with us pretty much. Another one of them is a man by the name of Maurice Venden. I was taught that these people are apostates. We were warned against their writings, and we were told how terrible was their teachings. This is when I was a part of what is called the Historic Adventist movement. And the worst of them was a man by the name of Jack Sikira. He was regarded as the epitome of false teachers. He has written several books. One of the most well-known is a book called Beyond Belief. And, I never read the writings of Jack Sikira, but I listened to a couple of his tapes at one point, and he is the one who really pointed me in the right direction by highlighting the truth about the two Adams. I never understood the doctrine of the two Adams till Jack Sikira gave me a clue. And I began to look at the Bible and to study that idea for myself. And I came to understand the truth about righteousness by faith. So there are these two camps in Adventism, and both of them are strongly in opposition to each other. And I believe it's like the blind men of Hindustan, where each of them was partly right, but all were in the wrong. Because the truth is, the main problem with these groups in Adventism is that none of them understands the true nature of humanity. Man is made up of two parts, spirit and body. Two natures, spiritual nature, physical nature. In our bodily nature, nothing changes. You become a Christian, nothing changes. But in our spirits, we are born again. Paul says, all things have become new. This is the basis of righteousness. This is the basis on which we live a new life. It is not the law. But every single one of these people I just highlighted here, every one of the six of them, all of them are still locked into the law. Why? Because they are all in the Adventist camp. And once you are in the Adventist camp, you will never escape from the law. That is problem number one. And the second problem is the belief in the Trinity. 50% of them are still Trinitarians. If Satan doesn't get you one way, he gets you the other way. So in the One God movement, there are so many people who don't believe in the Trinity, but they are locked into the legalism of the law, and they are in the same fire, in the same position as the Trinitarians who are in the other camp. So the great underlying error is, first of all, the belief in a three-in-one God. Secondly, it's the centrality of the law. And thirdly, of course, it's the belief that Christians are governed by the law. So, in one of these three things, all the errors that developed in the Advent movement can be found. All the errors. The misunderstanding of the pre-Advent judgment, the misunderstanding of the end-time Day of Atonement. These are the foundations. So God started something good, and because Adventism moved into these beliefs, they have never been able to present the truth in the right way. The truth about the end-time judgment, which is clearly a part of God's truth for the end time, has not been understood. The truth about the end-time Day of Atonement is criticized, it is attacked, it is not accepted, it is not going anywhere, and it is because of these errors. So, what I want to say is that for those of us who are involved in this fellowship and similar fellowships around the world, what we are understanding is that God is trying to bring a proper understanding of these doctrines, because this is the key to understanding his message for the time of the end. I know that in this presentation this morning, I've maybe brought more questions than answers, but at least I hope that you have an idea of the background and the history that most of us are coming from, and why we stand where we stand, and why, in a way, we're kind of alone. There are so many people who don't agree with us. There are so many people who won't associate with us, who won't fellowship with us. And I hope you can understand the reasons a little better. They may seem to be theological reasons, but they are important theological reasons. And hopefully, as we go forward, by God's grace, we will avoid the pitfalls that caught up these earlier believers and that still exists so much all over the place.